Civilizations do not disappear overnight. They erode slowly, weakened by pressures that accumulate across generations. Often the most destructive forces are not armies or plagues, but shifts in the environment that quietly undermine the foundations of society. Throughout history, environmental stress has been one of the most consistent drivers of civilizational decline. When climates shift, when rivers change course, when soils lose their fertility, the systems that sustain complex societies begin to falter. These changes rarely announce themselves with drama. Instead, they arrive as subtle variations in rainfall patterns, as gradual drops in agricultural yields, as slow expansions of arid land where crops once flourished. Consider the case of the classic Maya civilization, which reached remarkable heights between 250 and 900 C. At its peak, millions of people lived in densely populated urban centers across what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. They built monumental architecture, developed sophisticated writing systems, and maintained complex trade networks. Yet by the 10th century, many of their great cities had been abandoned. Research points to a combination of environmental stresses that developed over centuries. Evidence from sediment cores and climate records indicates that the region experienced prolonged droughts during the Terminal Classic period, particularly severe episodes between 800 and 1000 C. These droughts did not destroy the civilization in a single season. Instead, they created cumulative agricultural shortfalls that strained the social and political systems the Maya had built. As harvests became less reliable, the surplus that supported rulers, administrators, priests, and craftspeople began to shrink. Historians suggest that this led to increased competition among elites, erosion of political authority, and eventual abandonment of urban centers. The Maya people themselves did not vanish, but the centralized institutions that defined the classic period could not adapt to the new environmental reality. Environmental pressure operates through systems rather than individuals. When a society depends on predictable rainfall for its staple crops, even modest changes in precipitation patterns can cascade through the entire economic structure. Farmers produce less. Markets contract. Tax revenues decline. The state struggles to maintain roads, irrigation works, and administrative functions. Over time, the complex interdependencies that make civilization possible begin to unravel. The Akkadian Empire of ancient Mesopotamia provides another example. Around 2200 BC, this empire, which had unified much of Mesopotamia under centralized rule, experienced rapid collapse. Archaeological evidence from settlement patterns and agricultural data suggests that a severe drought lasting perhaps 3 centuries struck the region. Dust deposits in marine sediment cores from the Gulf of Oman indicate an abrupt increase in aridification at precisely this time. The drought did not simply cause crop failures. It altered the entire relationship between people and land. In northern Mesopotamia, where rain-fed agriculture had supported dense populations, communities dispersed or migrated south. The administrative systems built to manage irrigation, collect tribute, and coordinate labor could not function when populations scattered. The empire fragmented not because of military defeat, but because environmental conditions had eliminated the economic base that sustained it. Soil degradation represents another form of environmental stress that operates slowly but relentlessly. Ancient civilizations often relied on intensive agriculture to feed growing populations. Without modern understanding of soil chemistry or crop rotation, they sometimes depleted the nutrients their fields required. Evidence indicates that soil erosion and salinization contributed to agricultural decline in ancient Sumer, where irrigation in a poorly drained landscape gradually increased salt concentrations in farmland. Each generation might notice only slight decreases in productivity. But over centuries, fields that once yielded abundant harvests produced less and less. As agricultural output declined, so did the population the land could support. Cities shrank. Trade diminished. The institutional complexity that characterized the civilization at its height could not be maintained on a contracting economic foundation. Environmental stress also interacts with social structures in ways that amplify decline. When resources become scarce, inequality often deepens. Elites may command a larger share of diminishing surpluses, leaving less for the majority of the population. This can erode social cohesion and reduce the collective capacity to respond to challenges. Historians suggest that rigid social hierarchies sometimes prevented civilizations from adapting to environmental changes, as decision-making power remained concentrated among groups insulated from immediate consequences. The important pattern across these examples is gradualism. Environmental stress rarely destroys a civilization in a single catastrophic event. Instead, it degrades the systems that make complexity possible. Agricultural productivity declines incrementally. Revenues fall slowly. Administrative capacity erodes year by year. Population centers depopulate over generations rather than months. This gradual quality makes environmental stress particularly difficult for societies to address. Each individual year might seem manageable. Leaders may assume that next season will bring better rains, that the current difficulties are temporary. By the time the cumulative nature of the stress becomes undeniable, institutions may lack the resources and cohesion needed for effective response. Not all environmental changes lead to collapse. Some societies have adapted successfully to shifting conditions through technological innovation, social reorganization, or migration. The key variable appears to be adaptability, the capacity of institutions and populations to change their practices in response to new realities. Rigid systems, those heavily invested in specific landscapes or technologies, often prove more vulnerable than flexible ones. The archaeological and historical record suggests that civilizations decline when environmental stress persists longer than their adaptive capacity can manage. A society might weather a decade of drought or even a generation by drawing on stored surpluses, adjusting agricultural practices, or accepting reduced complexity. But when stress continues for centuries, when the environment shifts beyond the range that existing institutions were designed to manage, collapse becomes more likely. What remains consistent across these cases is the role of accumulated pressure. Environmental stress weakens economic foundations, which in turn undermines political and social institutions. As institutions weaken, the society's ability to coordinate responses to further challenges diminishes. The process feeds on itself, each stress making the system more vulnerable to the next. The decline of these civilizations unfolded across generations, driven by environmental pressures that compounded over time. While many details remain uncertain and historians continue to debate the relative weight of different factors, the evidence consistently points to gradual erosion rather than sudden catastrophe. These societies did not fail because of any single drought or harvest failure, but because sustained environmental stress exceeded their capacity to adapt. In the end, complexity retreated, populations dispersed, and the institutions that had once seemed permanent faded into the landscape they could no longer sustain.